In Greek mythology, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. Well, a couple weeks ago, Anthropic built fire. Since then, 3 things have happened. Number 1, the entire cybersecurity space has been pooping its pants recently because of Project Glasswing, where Anthropic has reached out to a select few companies to try and patch out some egregious vulnerabilities that Mythos has found in operating systems, browsers, your mother's Gmail, everything. And number 2, Project Glasswing seems to be useless because apparently a bunch of Discord users somehow got access, preview, on the day of Project Glasswing announcement. And nothing makes sense to me anymore because the way they got it relies on a 4-step supply chain attack. Nothing makes sense anymore. And finally, researchers found a single flaw in the MCP protocol, which they applied to all these AI platforms and products, and boom, now they have 10 critical and high CVEs, man. What? They found all these CVEs and vulnerabilities in AI products and frameworks strictly based off of a single issue that they saw in the MCP protocol from Anthropic's open source SDK. I've said MCP 100 times. What is it? MCP, or Model Context Protocol, is essentially just a way for your AI agent, which is your brain. It could be a chat interface or Claude Code, which is just a harness around an AI model, or just any other AI model in general. It is a mechanism for the AI agent brain to talk to a bunch of different resources like databases, APIs, CLI tools, and third-party products in general. Now, a good thing about MCP is that agents do not need to memorize how every single one of these interfaces work. Instead, each interface can define how the AI agent can interact with it. And then the only thing the AI agent needs to know is what information do we have here, or what can I use it for? Now, MCP servers and clients communicate through JSON RPC encoded messages. These messages can be sent through std.io or streamable HTTP. Anthropic suggests using std.io wherever possible. And all it means is that an MCP client would launch an MCP server as a sub-process. All the server does is it takes JSON RPC messages in the std.in, standard input, and the output goes to standard output. And apparently the intended way of configuring an MCP server for the std.io transport is to use the std.io server parameters with config like this, where the command and args define how to start your MCP server. In this case, your myapp.py defines the MCP server and you're just running that through Python. Now, bad practice is if user input somehow reaches the command and args, because if that user input had the command rm and the args rf, they win $1 million. That's it. That's the main issue. Now, using this principle, Ox Security found a vulnerability in Ledda, which is an AI platform. I personally like this a lot because in Ledda, you can configure a streamable HTTP server, but the researcher just replaces the whole payload and just defines a std.io transport MCP server, specifies some arbitrary commands to make a HTTP request back to their server, and then when the MCP server configures, bada boom, they get a reach back. That is arbitrary command execution. I actually really like that attack. And another instance, they found a way to get the exact same thing, but through a prompt injection. They just directed the LLM to website which had a bunch of different instructions. LLM ran those instructions, wrote arbitrary content to the mcp_config file, bada bing, bada boom. Once again, they have command execution. And apparently they repeatedly reached out to Anthropic to fix this so that it could protect millions of downstream users. However, Anthropic declined to modify the protocol's architecture, saying that it is as expected. If Anthropic says that it is expected, I would be petty to challenge that. What am I gonna read through source code, read through documentation to try and prove them wrong? I read through the documentation and source code. Look, Anthropic's documentation does warn us about dangers when it comes to using local MCP servers through std.io. They did say that if you're not careful, an attacker could include a malicious startup command in the client configuration. So look, it's not like they didn't know about it. They did. Actually, when did they update this? Well, at the very least, they know now. But reading through the implementation on their end in their own source code, when it comes to, for example, the main Python file, or even an example file that they provided, doesn't look like they do a great job of adhering to that themselves. For example, the command here that they've got is straight from the command variable in their config, and that command is passed straight into std.io server parameters. Now, the config itself is loaded from a file called serversconfig.json. I guess if you get arbitrary file write into serversconfig.json, that is an instant remote code execution if someone runs this simple chatbot. Thing is, I agree with Anthropic here. The responsibility for making sure that user input doesn't reach your MCP configuration is actually on you. Even if they did have controls in place, what can they truly do to prevent an attacker from bypassing whatever the hell they... Let's say Anthropic blocks all curl commands in their MCP configuration. There's other ways of achieving the same result. I get it. It's quote unquote insecure by design, but it is also the consumer's responsibility to make sure that user input doesn't just go straight into your MCP configuration. How did a bunch of random dudes on Discord somehow get access to Mythos? I have been trying for weeks. To understand it, we go back in time to March 19th. This is the day Trivy got compromised. Now, Trivy is a vulnerability scanner which got injected with some credential stealing malware on the GitHub action side of things. Essentially, the threat actor, Team PCP, made some commits to Aqua Security, Trivy, on GitHub. They released a new repository tag. New version of GitHub action files would make an outbound call to the typo squatted domain, scan.aquasecurity.org. Now that tripped me up when I was writing detections, by the way, which would backdoor a bunch of binaries and stole credentials from a bunch of providers. And then on March 24th, March 24, baby, they hit Light LLM. Now that same Trivy supply chain attack resulted in Light LLM's accounts and pipelines being compromised, and the threat actor then pushed new versions of Light LLM straight up to their PyPy account. Versions were 1.82.7 and 82.8. And if you install the newer versions, the post-install hooks would instantly just run credential harvesting scans and just ship it out to models.lightllm.cloud, which is not an actual domain that LightLLM uses. So that happened. And then on the same day, March 24th, we had Mercor, which is another AI product. So that's AI number 1 and AI number 2. Mercor got hacked through Light LLM. For context, Mercor AI is a recruiting company which uses AI technologies to help screen through employees. Apparently a lot of the top tech firms use this. They got some SSH keys. They yoinked some AWS tokens, Kubernetes secrets, environment files, deployed a bunch of containers across their Kubernetes cluster because why not? And then yoinked all that data straight to models.lightllm.cloud, which is not owned by LightLLM. This resulted in a massive data exfiltration attack. They got passports, interviews, biometric data, actual employee stuff. And this apparently included some Anthropic model internal URL endpoints. And then finally, today we find out that on the day of the Project Glasswing release, some Discord admins use these API endpoints. They guessed the new endpoint for Mythos by just brute forcing, maybe. I don't know how they exactly did it. And one of them was a contractor. The contractor just had some active creds from Anthropic, which they used to then access the Mythos model. This is a fun drinking game, or at the very least, it's a fun game from now where next time I have a supply chain attack, I'm going to count the number of AI components involved. And the high score to beat clearly is 3. Does this mean Anthropic needs to improve their security? Not really. Maybe they need to be a bit more diligent with efficient termination of contractors and some authorization controls, I guess.